As you saw from our exclusive text interview, President Trump this weekend told me that his party is, quote, winning the shutdown and cutting costs big time. As 5 days in, his administration is looking to make things as painful as possible for Democrats and maybe even their voters. What's next? Joining us now is the president's top economic advisor, Kevin Hassett. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. So the White House said on Friday that discussions are still underway between President Trump and OMB Director Russell Vought on identifying cuts to agencies and layoffs, permanent layoffs of federal workers. The White House said these cuts could come as soon as Friday. Nothing's been announced yet. Are these layoffs still coming? How many people could lose their jobs? What agencies are we talking about?
Right. Well, what we can say is that everybody in the White House wants that not to happen. What we want is we want the Democrats to come forward and to make a deal that's a clean, continuing resolution that gives us 7 more weeks to talk about these things. But the bottom line is that with Republicans in control, the Republicans have a lot more power over the outcome than the Democrats. And the Democrats need to show some leadership, as Senator Fetterman has, and step up and give us the sort of moderating outcome that the Federalist Papers thought senators would do. You remember in Federalist 63, both Madison and Hamilton said the senators are actually the voice of reason. They're the guys who get things to be moderate and to calm down. And as I look at this Democratic Party, you know, we've already had this Senate controlled by Republicans defeat more of President Trump's nominees than were for the whole 4 years for Biden not accepted by this. So they're basically marching in lockstep with Chuck Schumer. And I think that what the president's hoping for is that senators that have read the Federalist Papers and understand their view in the Federalist Papers that they need to stand up and be the moderating influence, it's time for them to do that and to moderate this party that's run really far to the left of where it used to be.
It doesn't sound as though they're following your advice there. So are these layoffs definitely happening? Because Russ Vought said on Wednesday it would happen within 1 to 2 days and still nothing.
Well, again, I think that if the president decides that the negotiations are absolutely going nowhere, then there will start to be layoffs. But I think that everybody's still hopeful that when we get a fresh start at the beginning of the week, that we can get the Democrats to see that it's just common sense to avoid layoffs like that, to avoid the $15 billion a week that the Council of Economic Advisors says will harm GDP if we have a shutdown, and also just all the payments for rent payments and so on that people won't be able to make because they're not getting paid. And so I think that we think the Democrats, there's a chance that they'll be reasonable once they get back into town on Monday. And if they are, then I think there's no reason for those layoffs.
President Trump said on Truth Social that he had a meeting with Russ Vought to, quote, determine which of the many Democrat agencies he recommends to be cut. What exactly is the president refer to when he refers to Democrat agencies? I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, I guess that's shorthand for the agencies that generally are the favorites of the Democrats. And, I think we've all got our favorite agencies. Like for me, it's the Council of Economic Advisors. I think that the President Trump and Russ Vought are lining things up and getting ready to act if they have to, but hoping that they don't.
Republican senators have been expressing concerns about how the Trump administration seems to be targeting funding for projects in blue states. Vought paused funding for major infrastructure projects in New York City and Chicago, canceled money for climate change projects, mostly in states with Democratic governors. Republican Senator Susan Collins said this is not appropriate. Republican Senator Thom Tillis warned it could 100% backfire against Republicans. You must have concerns about the precedent being set here. I mean, government shutdowns are not uncommon, and someday a Democrat's going to be working in the building behind you.
Well, that is exactly what's happened in the past. And but think about the contrast in the Federalist Papers discussion that we just had. Susan Collins came out and she said, I don't like this action that the president's taking. That's the kind of independent voice in the Senate that the Senate is supposed to give. And yet the Senate Democrats are marching in unison towards like destruction, like lemmings off a hill. Off a cliff. And so I think that in the end it's natural to put more pressure on the states where the senators are being intransigent, so the senators themselves see the costs that they're imposing on the American people. I think that's completely logical.
You keep talking about the Federalist Papers. I mean, what do you think Alexander Hamilton will make of the president just stopping the funding of projects that have been authorized, appropriated, gone through Congress, House, Senate, Conference Committee, President signed off on it. He just and the unilateral executive just cancels those projects. I don't know that Hamilton would approve of that, or John Jay or Madison.
Well, Hamilton would approve of us not spending money that's not appropriated, and that's what's happened right now because the government shut down. I also suspect that if he were alive today, that he'd be disappointed in the Yankees game. But
so let me ask you: this is obviously urgent, and you're saying President Trump finds it urgent and thinks it's important. Is he talking to Democrats? In the past, he has talked about, when he wasn't president, how this is the responsibility of the president to roll up his sleeves, get to work. It's an example of failed presidential leadership. If there's a shutdown, this is the guy you heard J.B. Pritzker say. This is the guy who wrote The Art of the Deal. He prides himself in his deal making. Is he involved? Is he talking to Schumer? Is he talking to Jeffries?
I mean, the president is doing the work of the American people every day with an amount of energy that is really awe-inspiring. He's also working with James Braid, who's the head of Leg Affairs for us. And we in the White House ourselves are taking calls regularly with senators on both sides of the aisle. And so I think that yes, conversations are continuing, and we're hopeful that this will have a positive resolution really soon.
It doesn't sound like he's talking to Democratic leaders. Let me ask you a question, because this is what the Democrats say is the main reason they're using their leverage in this way. At the end of this year, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare subsidies, are set to expire. It is just a fact that if nothing happens to extend them or whatever, that the health care costs for millions of Americans will skyrocket. Analysts from the Kaiser Family Foundation found that 80% of all Obamacare subsidies go to people in states that President Trump won in 2024. Republican Congressman Don Bacon told me that there's room to compromise here because tons of Republicans are going to not be able to afford their coverage when these subsidies expire. Why not just lean into this, come up with some sort of compromise, and then end the shutdown?
Well, now is not the time to have that debate. Now is the time to keep the government open and not hold all these government workers, especially in Virginia and Maryland, hostage. And so that debate is a debate that can happen. I remind that these Obamacare subsidies were passed by Democrats and set to expire this year because they were viewed as an essential emergency action during COVID. And whether they should expire or not, well, in fact, like the duty of keeping them going permanently was theirs back then when they passed the action, and they didn't because they thought it would be too expensive. And so I think that get a clean resolution and then discuss this matter in the normal course of action. That's the way the Congress should work.
Before you go, I'm really curious what you think about this Treasury Department development of a $1 commemorative coin for the U.S.'s 250th birthday. U.S. Treasurer Brandon Beach shared draft images of the coin, and it bears the image of the current president, President Trump. This despite the fact that an 1866 law enshrined in the U.S. Code says a living person cannot be featured in U.S. currency. This is obviously dates back to concerns about wanting to avoid the appearance of a monarchy. Is President Trump planning on changing that law?
Right. The fact is that we've got great plans for the 250th anniversary. And in fact, you should watch the festivities today where President Trump is celebrating the Navy. And in terms of reading through what is and isn't available under that law, there have been times in the past where commemorative coins have been printed with the faces of living people. And so I think that they're on solid ground if they decide to do that.
Kevin Hassett, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.